Speaking to you from beautiful Philadelphia, all about redundancy. Believe it or not, there was a time when redundancy was a really big grammatical problem. And it's simply that when we write, we have a tendency to repeat words. So when you go back and grammar check what you typed out on your electric typewriter, you would realize that instead of saying I'm going to the park, you would write I'm going to the park, or I'm going to the park. So it was very common. It still is, except our phones correct it for us a lot of the times without us even being aware that it happened. So redundancy is when we needlessly repeat. And on the most grammatical level, that is when we repeat or words that we've already written down. So even in a time when our computers correct our grammar in the background, redundancy is a huge part of writing. And we can look at the ways that we can reduce it to optimize our writing and how we can use it to optimize our writing. When we write, it is very much like we are assembling these little structures. Each sentence, think of it like playing with Legos. Each sentence is this little structure that we assemble. And if there are several sentences grouped together in a paragraph, these are a group of sentences that are usually have to do with one or two things. So what occurs in writing all the time is repeated information, just because when we start a new sentence, we're still talking about the same thing. And when we start a new sentence, it's to say something new. And yet, what happens is that we end up repeating ourselves over and over and over again as we follow this gradually changing line of information that we are feeding our reader. Writing is so complex that I would never even try counting the different ways that the different lenses we could put on to optimize our writing, the different ways we could look at our writing to make it better. I see no end to the different ways, but let's try these lenses on. Let's look at writing as, okay, think of your reader's brain as this creature, and what you're doing is you're feeding this creature bead by bead, this line of new information. Every time you give that brain a piece of information it has not gotten yet, it lights up a little bit. So if your story is this line of beads, every time one of those beads is new information, that brain lights up. Now look at your own brain when you're reading or watching a movie. What happens with your brain when you get some new information? And this could be for whatever is going on in your life. If you're taking the bus across town, if you get any new bit of information, your brain lights up a little bit. Remember, when you're writing the first draft of your story, don't worry about this kind of thing at all. Turn the editor off. Just be in your place of imagination and let the sentences get put together as awkwardly as they are first put together, and don't worry about it. Just get it on the page. But when you're in a drafting mode, when you can go ahead and start up your editor, get your editor going again, you can look back and you can take a look at each sentence as if it's a little structure in itself. And look at it for the quality of information. Don't just read the sentence. Ask yourself, what information for each part of the sentence am I giving the reader? And is it new information, or is part of that sentence information that I have already given the reader. If you have ever read a work that on the surface seems so simply written, like a Kurt Vonnegut novel, so easy to read, and yet very powerful writing, and it's a mystery. How did this become such good writing when it seems like it's so simply written that it seems like the kind of thing that anyone should be able to write, and yet there's there are a quality or qualities about it that make it such powerful writing. I bet you anything that one thing about that writing is that the redundancy has been greatly reduced. The author went in there and pruned away all the parts of the writing where it was redundant information. If it was already told to the reader already knows that and does not need to be told again. And the sentences were systematically simplified, taking out unnecessary repeated information. Redundancy of information is something we don't really notice unless we're paying attention. The other day I watched the news about that plane that got lost, and yes, it's a strange circumstance, and I hope the people on the plane are all right. The newscast, extremely repetitive, basically giving me the same information again and again and again. I understand that's the nature of the medium. We're not talking about a short story here. This is a newscast. But it really, I mean, it just amazed me how much I was given the same information. And redundancy of information happens to us a lot. So it's normal that our writing should be full of redundant information. When we're first writing, most likely it's going to happen a lot. And what we can do is we can go in. Okay, let's say that this is a story. Nora parks her car outside of the bakery. She goes into the bakery. She walks up to the bakery cashier, asks for an application, sits down by the window. Outside her car, she looks up and sees that outside her car is starting to roll down the hill. Okay, when we go back, we said that Nora walked into the bakery. We don't need to say that she went to the bakery cashier. The reader already knows that it's in a bakery. So it's already in the reader's mind that Nora is in the bakery. When she goes up to the cashier, the reader knows it is the bakery cashier. When she's at the window, when she sees her car outside rolling down the hill, you don't need to say that the car is outside. The reader already knows, has already been told that the car was parked outside. This can seem almost trivial, but when you're thinking about the overall quality of a work, keeping these in mind is a way to tighten up your story and make it more exciting to read. I'm getting meticulous about the parts of the sentence and the lens I'm using. The focus is on the information. What have I already told the reader? Every time you tell the reader something, they have that in mind, and you don't need to tell them that again. Let's say that I want to write a story and I want to really emphasize that it's a really windy day. So at the beginning of the story, oh, it's so windy outside. As the story continues, if I don't need to say that again. It's sort of like a light switch. When you turn it on, it's on. If you tell the reader it's really windy, unless you're going to tell them something new about the wind, in their mind, the wind is still blowing. It isn't like it only blows for a minute and then it turns off and you need to go and tell them again that it's windy. They already, in their little virtual reality that they're creating from reading your story. The wind is still blowing. I know what happens with me when I'm first writing, and I'm doing a great job at not being critical about writing when I'm first writing, is that I have something in mind like that. It's a mood setter. I have in mind this idea of the wind. So I'll write over and over and over again, you know, and it's very effective for initially writing. Later I can take all of those out except for the first one. Another form of redundancy is repeated words. Let's say that your story takes place in a casino and everyone is looking, the whole story, everyone is, it's mostly what happens in the story. So-and-so looks over at so-and-so, who's looking over at so-and-so, who's looking at this, who's looking down at that, who's looking out the window. Again and again and again, the word looking, looking, looking. So one thing we can do is we can go and we can either use software or try to find it ourselves. Overly used words that are basically, yes, they are describing different things happening because different characters are doing basically the same thing, even though looking out the window can really be very different from someone looking down at their cards. Still, we can bring, you know, it's a point where we can bring more variety into the different actions in the story. On the other hand, just by saying something different does not mean you're giving the reader different information. If you want your protagonist to have a very strong feeling, say that they're madly depressed, and you want to convey that, simply finding different ways of stating the same thing is not going to be very effective. What you want to do is you want, you know, instead of repeating that your character is madly depressed, find different things. Not the depression itself, but what are the symptoms? How does it affect the rest of their life? What is the new and unexpected things about that depression that you can bring up, and in that way emphasize the way they're feeling? So if you want to bring one thing in your story, build it up and make it stronger and stronger and stronger, try to find creative ways of saying something new about and indirectly about that one thing. It could be with the things that have to do with that one thing that'll emphasize it and build it up in your reader's mind. Like most things about writing, there's no hard rule about any of this. There are a lot of cases where redundancy is exactly what you need. So it's a matter of looking at how redundancy naturally shows up in your writing and gaining the skills to eliminate it whenever you think it will improve your writing. On the other hand, when you're writing dialogue that sounds like the kinds of things that you would really overhear real people saying, redundancy is a way of making the dialogue sound natural, because in day-to-day life we repeat ourselves a lot. And redundancy is not a form of bad writing. Let's look at humor. You have these funny characters that, you know, there's a character that could only say one line, but every time they say it, it's funnier. And it has to do with the situation. It has to do with the context. Also, of course, there's music and poetry. The chorus of a song, that chorus, it repeats 4 times. And every time it repeats, that is like the highest point of the song. Now, when there's a lot of redundancy in a story, it can seem diluted. It can seem watered down and drawn out, and it can have the effect of boring the reader, and it can become a tedious thing to read. But if we take the time to look at the quality of information in our stories and take out everything that the reader can subconsciously put together on their own, we can condense that story. We can make it still very easy to read, but have a be able to have a greater overall effect on the reader as they read it. Thanks for watching. I hope that this video supplied you with information you can use in your own art and writing. I want to thank everyone who leaves comments. You are the driving force behind me making these videos. If you ask a question, I do my best to answer them. And to everyone, I want to thank you. You really help a lot. Also, if you have the time, please go check out my illustrated, narrated, in video form storytelling at solomation.com. Bizarre, alternate reality fiction. It's many episodes of one story, the sometimes tragic adventures of my protagonist Lily. So I basically just put together a video of the things that come to mind when I consider redundancy of writing. If you have any more feedback, please leave a comment so that other people watching this, they might be able to learn something new that they can start using in their creative efforts. Again, I hope your writing goes great, and have a good day.